Another use of the HSV node is to even out the amount of contrast that appears across an image. And to demonstrate what I'm going to be talking about, we're going to add an image input node, and I'll show you an image where that is occurring. In your textures subdirectory under the images, I've given you a picture called poles._cyc, and CYC means I want it to be a cyclic image. But the problem is, with texturing, if I repeated this pattern over and over again, I would very easily see where the images just don't match up, because this picture is a picture of bamboo poles that was taken in the afternoon, and there's a shadow that falls across the bottom right hand corner, and then a very dark corner in the upper left corner, and then a white streak or a bright streak where the light is very bright where the sun was falling. And if we connect this up now to our HSV node by adding under the converter separate HSV, and while we're at it, just go ahead and add the combine HSV node as well. Now if we looked at just the value channel, we can see that in the middle of the image where the light was falling across the poles, the contrast of the image goes from dark to very bright. If I drag here in the dark spaces between the poles, the RGB values are 30, and then in the middle of the poles it gets up into the 200s. So the contrast is very high in the middle where the sun was falling. But then if I scroll down to the bottom of the corner of the image where the shadow is, I go from black, an RGB values of 9 and 14, but the maximum that I'll get is an RGB value of like 160, 140s I'm seeing in here. So it's much less than in the middle. So the contrast always goes in the middle from 0 to full range, and then down in the bottom corner in the shadows it only goes up to the middle. So if there was some way that I could multiply the highs, make the highs higher down here in the shadow and make these highs in the middle of the image lower, then I would even out the contrast, and we ideally want the entire image to vary between 0 and let's say 0.5. And the way we can do that is by using the RGB curve to invert and make a mask that we can then use to multiply these contrasts so that we have a very even amount of contrast across the entire image, and then use that as the value and not the current value. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a color RGB curve, and we're going to connect that up to our value socket, but what we're going to do is an invert. So I drag the left handle up and the right handle all the way down, and now all of the colors, the values that come in that are white, will be put out as black, and all the values that came in as black over here at 0 will be put out as white or 1. And to see that we've actually created this negative, we can duplicate the viewer node. When we look at this, we see we have the negative of that value channel. So now what happens now when we use our mix node and we tell the mix node to multiply the original value channel, I'm going to cut this thread here, multiply the original value channel by this inverted RGB channel, is we have a very gray area, and I want to use the full value of the mask, if you will. But now the issue is we have almost no contrast whatsoever, and we almost have a negative going on. If we back this off a little bit, you can see that very broad areas of the whole image become gray, and this is because this image, when it's inverted, is very fine-grained. In other words, it really gets in there and takes each individual pixel and computes its anti-pixel, and thus results in a image which is almost perfectly flat, almost has like no contrast at all, which we've kind of gone overboard. And without any contrast, the colors lose their clarity. So we need to reduce the graininess of our mask, and the way we do that to reduce the graininess of anything is we use a blur filter. So if we blur this mask, then let's give it 50 pixels by 50 pixels. And the number of pixels that you would use here would depend on the size of your texture. Now if we use that as a general guideline to tell Blender how to manipulate the values, you can see that now we have kind of a blurry, more of a general guideline to tell Blender how to multiply these images together. Now when we look at our output, we see that we have a completely even amount of contrast across the surface of the image. It's a little darker than I would like, so perhaps I can add an RGB curve to lighten up the image a little bit. But we have effectively eliminated this very bright stripes in the middle and have evened out the contrast across the entire image. And so let me go ahead and do a little housekeeping here. Keep it kind of nice so you can see how things are working. And take the output of this multiply node and feed it into the value, which it already is, and then take the output of the combine and feed it to an RGB curve. And now we can lighten this up. And maybe increase the contrast a little bit by introducing an S-shaped curve. Too much. So now we have a nice, deep, rich, wood-colored texture that has a uniform amount of contrast across the entire image, and we've removed the bright spot in the middle. And you can do this with flash pictures, and this is especially useful in creating tileable or cyclical images that you can use in texturing planes and walls, in this case, across a broad render when you're using it as a material texture.